All the pop-ups. Good morning. My name is Sunny Summers. I'm a senior policy advisor and also the Oregon Department of Agriculture's rules coordinator. I'm going to be your stewardess for this meeting. Appreciate everybody joining us. To start with, let's go through the list of invited RAC members. This is our second webinar of the day, and probably, I know for me, the second time I've used webinar in Teams, so we're all in it together, and appreciate everybody's patience as we learn this new technology. Robert Bramlett. Did not.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you are. Sorry.
Yep,
I did
right
see
here.
you. Rich Reed.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Hey,
Perfect.
Rich Reed from Foster Farms, Complex Manager for Oregon, Washington, Colorado.
Awesome. Thank you. Aaron Dawson.
Hi, I'm Erin Dawson. I'm the nutritionist with 3 Mile Canyon Farms.
Thank you, Aaron. I did not see Stacy Foster. Okay. Dr. Rodney Ferry.
Yes, I'm a veterinarian in Lakeview, Oregon. I have a bit of a nutritional background and some interest in nutrition as well as we sell some feeds and such. And so I just thought I'd join and see what was going on.
Awesome. Happy to have you. Corey Sandburn.
Howdy, I'm the feed mill manager with Grange Co-op down in Central Point, Oregon.
Thank you. Drew Corrigan. Let's see, Drew. I'm just double checking our public in case they got sidetracked there. And then Susan Ramsey. I also don't see Susan. Okay, so the order of business today, we are going to talk about draft rules. Dr. Scholes will go through those rules with the RAC members. Use the raise hand feature. It's a pretty small group, but that way I can call on you and get him to pause. If you've worked with him, you know he's a fast talker, said with lots of love. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for public members to ask questions or provide any feedback. And I'll also be asking everybody, including our public members today, what the financial impacts of these rule changes are. You know, is it going to require more record keeping, more equipment, staff, those kind of things? That's part of what we are required to submit when we file rules with the Oregon Secretary of State, which is the next step in this process. We'll file them as proposed after this meeting and taking into account folks' suggestions. File those as proposed. That'll open a public comment period. We'll hold a virtual hearing for people who want to give verbal comments, and we will have a written comment period that's open. Typically, it's about a month, and that will include both email, or we have a form that folks can use on our rulemaking website, and I'll put that in the chat. All of the information associated with this rulemaking will be available on the ODA rulemaking webpage. So if you want to go back and read through something or listen to somebody else's thoughts on this RAC and you can't remember, you'll be able to pull up that video on that website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. And like I said, I'll put the link in the chat, and that way any of our public members who maybe haven't seen a copy of the draft rules, if you want to pull it up, you can pull it up there yourself as well.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. So my plan is to I'll give a little bit of an overview of our feed program and then kind of jump into the draft, going through rule by rule, just the proposed changes and the reasoning behind them, and then we'll pause at the end of each rule to allow for discussion on that. If please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me at any point, though, if something pops into your mind. So just a little bit of an overview of our feed program. So the commercial feed program here in Oregon is created by statute. It is intended to be a essentially a truth in advertising program. It is not a safety-based program. FDA takes the feed safety portion of this. In Oregon, the requirements are essentially that feeds have to be registered, they can't be adulterated, and that they have to be correctly labeled and include approved ingredients. That's kind of the mainstay of the program here in Oregon. And so kind of keeping those in mind, we do adopt several national standards, and we try as much as possible to stay within harmonized with those national standards of both from the American Association of Feed Control Officials, AFCO, as well, and the FDA and their feed regulatory program. And so you'll see a number of places where we do adopt national standards from those organizations. We can't implicitly adopt those, so we have to specifically adopt a time-stamped reference to those regulations. And so you'll see that through the rules in a couple places where we have to update rules every time those are updated. And so some of these are just kind of housekeeping changes. If AFCO has updated their official publication, therefore we have to update our rules to put a new year in there. And so some of these changes are just as simple as that. But with that, you should all be able to see the draft of the changes on your screen. This is going to look a little bit different than the PDF that was shared with everyone and online. We did have one additional change that I'll call attention to yesterday, and I learned in our meeting this morning that some of the revising features in Word don't translate when you save it as a PDF. And so the color, I wanted to really call out the color changes. One of the big changes we're making in this first rule, the definitions, is just alphabetizing the rule. It was driving me nuts that they're not alphabetized. Some of these, you have to look seven rules down to find a C word. And so some of these that we're not necessarily making a change, but we are just reorganizing them. And so those are the ones that are crossed out and underlined in green or double underlined. Those are just moves. They're not necessarily a new definition. So starting out, we are changing how we refer to the AFCO official publication. Right now, we refer to it in 3 different places in 3 different rules, which means every year when we update our reference to the AFCO official publication, we have to open up and do hearings and everything on 3 different rule changes just to update a date. So we are changing that a little bit this year, creating a definition of the AFCO official publication and putting the timestamp in there to help just standardize how we refer to that. We can then update that reference to the AFCO official publication by a single editorial change in one rule. So that's all that does. You will notice that this is a year behind. We have to stay a year behind because as of this point in time, the AFCO official publication, the current year, so the 2026 will come out in January, and that is a paid publication. AFCO makes the prior year publication, chapter 6 of the prior year publication, which is what we refer to, available for free online. And so we reference the prior year publication so that the terminology, the ingredient definitions that we refer to are the ones that are freely available to the public, and you do not have to pay to get access to them. A few just editorial changes, fixing capitalizations, things like that, moving definitions around. We did have to, it was recommended we need to strike for the feed purchaser. It creates a circular definition. So not a functional change, just a editorial change to make the definition a definition that doesn't point back at itself. We are adding a few new definitions here. One is labeling. We refer a lot to labels of products. But the labeling we are adopting, this is a definition used by both AFCO and FDA to some degree or variance. And it's also the definition we use in our veterinary products program. But essentially just defining that the label of a product is one thing, but labeling is both the label that's actually on the product, the packaging, as well as product materials that accompany. So that usually comes in more from an advertising standpoint than in the feed program. We also define the term label, which is a little bit different, but just to bring in those additional materials. Lot identifier, we're not changing that definition, just reorganizing it. Medicated feed, again, just editorial changes to fix capitalization and punctuation. Principal display panel, again, just editorial change. We are defining the term product because it's a term that's used, but is not defined right now. And so we are adopting largely a largely similar definition from our vet products program, as well as bringing in some of the terminology used in the statute, the statutory definition of what is required to be registered, but just clarifying that when we refer to a product being registered, it means that it's an item readily distinguishable from any other item by content, formula, formulation, brand name, trade name, manufacturer, or use of specified label and labeling. But it does not include packaging size. So if you have a 5-pound bag, a 50-pound bag, and a 2,000-pound pallet tote of the exact same product, they can be registered once. You don't have to re-register them just because you have a different bag size, as long as the formulation does not change. The main intent of the rulemaking here, and the only place you'll see really significant changes, is in the adoption of some language around civil penalties. So Senate Bill 832 during the 2025 legislative session granted the department the ability to utilize civil penalties rather than criminal violations. So right now, the way this program was built, the only enforcement capacity the department has is through criminal violations, through criminal action, having to get a law enforcement and the district attorney involved. That doesn't, for one, it's hard to do, but it's also kind of disproportionate with what we're dealing with. And so we were granted civil enforcement. And so a lot of what we're doing in these rule changes is adopting the framework for that civil enforcement. And so this is the term repeat violation is just part of that adoption to specify what is enforcement. You'll notice there's a few things that got pulled over. We are essentially adopting much of the structure that was already in use in our veterinary products and animal remedies program. And so there's a few changes there, but we're utilizing a lot of the same language just for clarity and to help with uniformity among the programs within the agency. Again, lot identifier was just moved. So that's the main changes in the definition. I'll pause there, see if there's any comments, questions from the RAC members. Okay, I don't see anyone unmuting, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. These next 3 rule changes, I'm going to do all 3 rules together because it's the same change in all of them. And that is, again, it's not actually, you know what, scratch that. I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So there are 2 changes that are happening across the next 3 rules. I'll present those, and then we do have a couple of state-approved ingredients to present as well for review. The main changes are, again, just using that the newly created definition of the AAFCO official publication rather than referring to the specific edition in each of these rules. So that will allow us to only have to change the date reference in the definition rule rather than each of these. And then also timestamping our reference to the Code of Federal Regulations, current practice with Oregon laws. So again, we can't outsource our rulemaking, so we can't refer to just an open-ended reference even to federal law. And so we have to timestamp those references. And so that's what we're doing here. This has kind of fallen out of practice to say just effective the date they're promulgated. The preference is to name a specific edition. And so that's what we're doing. And then I'm going to skip over this part and move to the next 2 rules just to show same adoption. The AAFCO official publication as a defined term, and then date stamping the CFR, and then same thing again in our feed terms with the AAFCO official publication. So those 3 rule changes are just that. And then we do have a couple of ingredients that have been submitted for and requesting consideration for state approval. So this is a process that we really started doing in an official capacity last year. Previously, it was just kind of it was an ill-defined process that whereby products that are not currently approved at a federal level, often because they fall in gray areas. Most of these are nutraceutical type products that kind of fall in a gray area. They're not a pharmaceutical. They're not a biologic. They're not a normal feed ingredient. And so they're just left in a gray area Most states just use what they refer to as enforcement discretion, where they just kind of look the other way. That makes it really difficult to enforce these regulations in an equitable manner, because one company may get a handshake deal to allow a product, but no other companies may want to use that product and not understand that that closed room deal was made. And so we try to do this in an open and transparent method. So this does not absolve companies of following federal regulations. So there are cases where a product may be approved on our list in Oregon, but it kind of still leaves it in that gray area federally. But in at least within our state, they are allowed to be used by our state laws. So there's several ingredients that were approved last year. We have, I believe, 5 for approval this year. One is bromoform, which is a chemical compound commonly found in the rumen already, but is being added or is proposed to be added to ruminating beef cattle and lactating dairy cattle diets. You'll see there's a limitation proposed as well. The company proposing this product provided extensive safety and efficacy studies. The intent of this product is is to reduce methane excretion in the rumen. And actually, I believe all of these products have a similar end goal. The 4 additional products were all proposed by one other company. They are all fermentation products. They are all microorganisms that are normally present as commensal organisms in the rumen, but they are also being used as a dried additive product. Several of these products are either pending approval or have been approved in one form or another by AFCO, but they're not currently available through the way that we adopt the AFCO official definitions. And so it's essentially just adding those in as well. I believe all 4 of these were proposed for lactating dairy cattle. Again, they are normal rumen commensal organisms that are just cultured in a pure culture and then dried and added back into the feed. Here's another one of those. And then the last 2 here. Again, all of these are proposed for lactating dairy cows. So those are the 5 products being proposed for inclusion as state approval. So I'll go ahead and pause and see both those products, and then any concerns or comments on the definitions and the date stamping of the federal CFRs. Okay.
It's really
So
okay to
moving-
speak up.
I take silence as a good sign that nothing we're doing is controversial and that we're doing our outreach right. I'm hoping that's the case. Okay, so this is a change that was just added in yesterday. So those on the RAC, the draft of the rules that was sent to you does not include this change. This is an issue that has recently come to light as we are working. So we met this morning at 9 with a different hearing for some proposed changes in our veterinary products program as well. And what we're discovering between those 2 programs is there was an understanding that was not supported by the regulations. But as we're beginning to get out and do some enforcement work here recently, we're finding a number of products that are not registered under our feed program, but that are, by our state definition, a feed. Many of those products are products that are either licensed with the FDA as an animal drug or are licensed with USDA, Center for Veterinary Biologics, as a veterinary biologic, but they are produced in a feed form. An example would be a colostrum mix that has added IgG in it and is licensed by the Center for Veterinary Biologics as a veterinary biologic, which means that they have to conform to very specific labeling requirements by USDA. They have to do safety and efficacy studies. They have to prove the safety of every ingredient in the product. But then that colostrum, because it is also providing and intended to provide energy, fat, and nutrients, it also meets our definition of a feed. So what's happened is those products fall into a little bit of an exclusionary gray area where they meet our definition of a feed, which means they have to be licensed, registered as a feed, and they have to be labeled as under the feed labeling requirements. But they also federally are licensed as a veterinary biologic or an animal pharmaceutical and have to meet the labeling requirements of those far stricter programs. And so what it means is essentially they are not eligible for registration in Oregon under the current regulations. And so those products essentially legally are not available to producers in Oregon. And so we're trying to remedy that. So under the statutory requirements for labeling, for the label format of feeds, there's a lot of discretion given to the department to set requirements by rule. Historically, we essentially adopt the AFCO labeling standards, which is continuing. We're not changing that standard. However, for those products that are already licensed by FDA or licensed by USDA and have very strict federal requirements for their labeling and the ingredients that can be used and the safety and efficacy required, what we are proposing is essentially creating an exemption specifically for the label formatting for those two categories of products. So those categories of products that are either regulated, so veterinary biologics regulated under the Federal Virus, Serum, and Antitoxin Act and labeled in accordance with the CFR that stipulates their labeling requirements, and animal drugs that are regulated under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and labeled in accordance with 21 CFR Part 500, the standards for labeling of animal drugs, that those two categories of products would be exempt from our state feed label requirement, and which would essentially allow them to be registered as feed products in Oregon as they are required because they meet our definition and be available for sale, but not have to meet our feed labeling requirements, which are in many places directly in conflict with the federal labeling requirements for a drug or a biologic. And so that's really the entire proposed change here. It's a minor change, but with potentially, I think, fairly significant impacts if we don't take this action, because there are entire categories of feeds that we're essentially kind of having to look the other way on right now and allow them to be marketed without registration in the state. Otherwise, they're just not going to be allowed to be sold in the state. I'll pause there, see if there's any feedback on that. Comments for or against it are all welcome.
That makes sense to me, Ryan. That I think I'm for that for sure.
Okay. And I should specify too that basically all of these things that we're requiring, the ingredients, the active ingredients, there's some form of activity required, like there's the name, address, quantity statements, lot numbers are all required of those products, but in a slightly different format. And there's just some things that they are not allowed, like veterinary biologics are not allowed to advertise the product as also providing energy or fat or any of those other nutrients, even though it does. Like in this case, the colostrum does provide that. They can't advertise it. So there's some slight differences there. So the guaranteed analysis is there, but it can't follow the same guaranteed analysis as a normal feed product. So it's just some discrepancies that have been identified that we want to remedy. Okay, the next change looks like a whole rewrite of a rule. It kind of is a little bit, but it's just to essentially codify and rule what's already being done and required of products. So as it currently stands, this rule is called product registration and fee. Really all it's doing is just setting the fee for a product. That fee for a product registration is not changing. Functionally, the process for registering a product is not changing. We're just making it clear to manufacturers that that's what's is going to be required so that everyone can see that requirement, see the standard, and have the opportunity to comment on it. So this first section here is essentially just stipulating that products have to be registered annually. That's already required. It's required kind of by implication in the statute, but just putting it out there and making it very obvious that you have to have that product registered, and then stipulating what information has to be provided in that registration, essentially transferring the responsibility to the company to ensure that all of the information required for us to determine if a product we're seeing on the shelf matches their registration, making sure that that is the company's responsibility. It's not our responsibility to pull it out of them. When a company submits their application, it is expected they're providing all these items. For the most part, that's already happening in the feed program. We're making some of these similar changes in our vet products program. Feed program, it's a little easier because they do submit a label along with the product. But essentially just codifying that. This last piece here is an addition and a change from what we're currently doing. This goes along with that last change we just talked about, where we will essentially allow the label formatting of veterinary biologics and animal drugs. But in order to be eligible for that, essentially those products, in addition to submitting their label, they also have to provide us a copy of that federal license, either through FDA or USDA, to confirm that they are licensed and they are complying with those requirements, because we are not experts in drug or biologic labeling. So it's essentially just on those products that fit that category, they've got to prove that they fit that category. And then the rest of this is just kind of editorial changes to make the wording flow more. We are removing a little bit of the language where we specify that a firm has to hold a specific license to just saying a firm must hold a license under our feed regulations to register feed products. There is the different license types we have right now for a firm, whether it's a non-manufacturing distributor, an in-state manufacturer, or an out-of-state manufacturer. We're not making changes to those right now. We are planning on revising those later this year. We felt like that needed more industry input, more discussion. Right now, we really feel like the license types we have are trying to force an industry that has changed over the last 50 years into definitions that were created by us, rather than trying to define license types based on what the industry currently looks like. And so we really want to do a lot more engagement on that. So we're simplifying the wording here. We're not changing the type of licenses right now. We do plan to come back later this year after we've had more opportunity to engage with the industry, because that will be one that potentially has a significant structural change. I don't think it'll have a price change. I don't think it'll have functionally change, but it is going to be a structural change to what we call those licenses and how we break companies up and define them. So we want to make sure we have a good understanding of the industry and we match our categories with what is actually being seen in the industry right now. Okay, I'll pause there, see if there's any feedback on that.
Robert.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Robert here. Just a quick question. This is going to kind of tie into the next one. So again, product registration seems to be in line with, the national, other 50 state standards that we've worked in. And for those, I didn't do a good introduction, but Robert Bradley with MWI Animal Health. So we're a nationwide distributor of commercial feed and animal health products. But the question, I guess, or comment is, as we go into the next section or further sections, we're going to start talking about the new proposed rules when it pertains to disciplinary actions. And part of that is the distribution of commercial feed that's not registered with the state. Is there any thought process to adding additional language to the rule that will require the agency to publish those items that are registered in the state for entities to be able to access, to ensure we're meeting the law?
Yeah, so
because I know as
there's
of
not
today, there's no database available. As a distributor, I cannot go source directly from the state of, is this product registration still valid?
Yeah, so as a licensee, you can actually. So we do have an online component to our registration database that you can go in and you can see any product that you currently have registered. There is supposed to be some functionality to be able to search, and see labels of products that have been registered. My understanding is that is currently broken and not functioning. That being said, the agency is currently in the process of completely replacing our entire customer relations system. So all the registrations and then eventually everything we do with you. We are in the process of speccing and building a full new system with a kind of customer first mindset of that, right? That as a company that may have vet products or animal remedies, feed products, pesticides, and seed products, right? You could go in and manage all of those licenses with one login, but that will also allow us to track products a lot better and expose those better online. So I don't know that that's necessarily something we've thought about doing in rule, just because the rules are normally about what you as a manufacturer have to do to license. The other side of it is usually that's more of the customer service we're trying to do, and that is absolutely the direction we're trying to go. We're trying to grin and bear it with the system we have, knowing that we are in the process of building what will hopefully be a much more user-friendly system for all involved.
Understood. Yeah, and it's a wholesaler, right? We understand that. Within the registration portal, we could see any products we may be the labeler on, which is a very small subset of our product, but we distribute products for thousands of manufacturers across the country.
Absolutely.
So, to compel compliance without visibility is difficult, right? So that's kind of where that thought process comes from.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that too, because I think that does play into that longer term kind of second phase of this, of really looking at the licensing and making sure that's matching the industry. Part of that update is also hopefully trying to better tease out the responsibilities, right? Of as a manufacturer versus as a distributor versus as a guarantor. We don't define any of those terms right now, and we don't really reference any difference in responsibility between them and how those all go together. And that's the other piece of that we're hoping to do as a longer term, to really look at who's responsible for what. As the wholesale distributor, what things are you responsible to license versus what's your responsibility as a distributor for something else, and those pieces. So yeah, that is all in the works. We just didn't want to do one piece of it or rush that whole process.
Okay. No, it's reassuring to hear that's kind of in the pipeline, though. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll pause real quick, see if there's any other comments if that stirred anything else from anyone. Okay, so this last one is the new rule. And this is the enforcement guidelines, as Robert kind of referenced. This is where we are adding in the process by which we will take civil enforcement action. So again, right now we have criminal enforcement authority, which really doesn't get used because it really, failing to register a product is not a criminal act. That is a paperwork oversight and something that should be handled in a civil process, not through a criminal process. So this is not creating authority. The legislature already did that. Now we have to define how that is going to be implemented, because the legislature essentially added a one-line thing into our statute saying that we have authority to enforce that section of statute and underlying rules by civil penalty, and authorized up to $10,000 per violation. Obviously, $10,000 per violation is not a realistic civil penalty for failing to register a feed. So we have to then specify what those civil penalties look like. So a lot of this language, again, comes from our veterinary products program to try and ensure that there's uniformity between those programs, because we understand a lot of manufacturers do have products in both, and there are products that even fall into both programs potentially. So trying to maintain some similarities between that. So civil penalties is not the only thing we are gaining in this process. The Administrative Procedures Act of Oregon provides a whole lot of different civil enforcement options. And so trying to specify that we have all of those options in our toolbox, that those alternate things may be, as simple as a letter of advisement. That's typically what we start with. When we find a product in the marketplace, we send a letter saying, hey, we found these products. Please make sure you're registering them, and go back through your records and make sure any products that you have currently are registered. They're, all the way up to a notice of violation, a withdrawal from distribution. So if we find products that are potentially adulterated or misbranded, we can embargo them, force them to be, withdraw them from the marketplace until they are fixed. all the way up to license and registration revocation, suspension, or denial if necessary for as subsequent actions to enforce compliance. So then typically the way that we enforce these is we kind of rank them into categories by severity. And so that's what we're trying to do here. There's a whole bunch of legal language that just essentially enables the enforcement of the utilization of these tools for the statutes and rules that apply. Category 1 are the most severe. These are things that are not just everyday, forgetting to register a product. This is, registering or attempting to register a product using fraudulent or deceptive practices, submitting false or fraudulent applications. Submitting a false application is not, having a typo on it or forgetting something. This is intentional. There's an intentionality here that you are, intentionally submitting a record to make it look like you are producing a third of the tonnage that you actually are, or something like that. Impeding investigations, and then selling products that are adulterated. And there's kind of two different levels of adulteration in our statute and rule, and so that you'll see that reflected here. There's a couple of definitions of adulteration that are products that are truly adulterations that are truly harmful to an animal. So using dangerous or ingredients that are specifically listed as harmful ingredients, severe pesticide contamination, those kinds of things would be under this level of adulteration. And then also to enable some of those alternate enforcement actions, if a product is issued a withdrawal from distribution order and a manufacturer continues to sell that product despite it being embargoed, that would be a category 1. Category 2 are kind of the still important ones, but less severe versions of it. So operating a manufacturing facility without a license, making false or misleading representation, selling a misbranded feed, so a feed that is not labeled correctly, which in Oregon, we do utilize pre-licensing label reviews. So essentially, if a product is misbranded in the marketplace, it has either gone through that process and then the company changed their label, or they are selling it despite being unregistered or being told to change their label. And then selling or distributing adulterated feeds that are the less severe adulteration. These are more the things that there's a few different products, like including screenings or holes in a product without labeling it as such. Less severe adulterations that are not there. It's still by statute is considered adulteration, but it's not it's a kind of a lower level, more along the lines of misbranding. Category 3 is failing to register a product. So this is where, having a product that didn't get registered comes in, is the lowest level. So then we get into the enforcement. This is where the civil penalties kind of start getting calculated. So category 3, the lowest of them, failing to register a product, starts low. We have these same progressions in our animal remedy program. And they do progress, but kind of reflecting the severity. Even though we are authorized $10,000 for civil penalties, we are not proposing to utilize the full $10,000 on any of these. So on a category 3, the first time you receive a violation, no matter how many violations are part of that, it's $250. If there's a repeat, if you don't correct the problem and we catch it again, it ramps up, but the maximum cap stays lower on the lower categories. There's some language here about repeat violations that match that definition that we provided. And then this last one, which is this similar language being added in our vet products, and I struggled through this a little bit, but essentially this rule is, even though we have category 1, category 2, category 3 defined, if you gross negligence, willful misconduct, so that results in substantial harm to human health, animal health, or the environment, essentially can go straight to the top of that $10,000 civil penalty. So this is, if you intentionally sell a product that includes an ingredient that is harmful to animals, and you knowingly, willingly sell the product, right? You got a test result back showing that this, the corn you're using has ergovalin that's just through the roof, and it's going to be toxic. Or you mix up a batch of feed and that that it ended up with rumensin in it. That you forgot to turn that off. It's been pointed out, it's there, and you still sell it, and it kills a whole bunch of horses. Things like that willful gross negligence, willful misconduct. It's essentially just allowing us to say that we're not going to start at $250 when you willfully broke the law. You willfully sold a product, marketed a product that you knew or should have known was dangerous to animals or to human health. So that's what that last piece is. It does not necessarily mean that civil penalty will be $10,000. It's just authorizing the use of up to that amount, kind of depending on the severity of that willful misconduct. So, and with that, Sonny, that is the end of my review. And that's all the rules and the changes that we're proposing. So we'll pause and see if there's any comment on that enforcement rule.
Can I get clarification? If say we end up with a mislabeled
Mhm.
product at 3 Mile Canyon, but it was sold to us by a third party,
Mhm.
and we say I didn't realize it was mislabeled, who's liable there or who's at fault?
Yeah. So selling or distributing. So if you purchased a mislabeled product, that has nothing to do with you. That is the manufacturer that sold that product. One other thing that just jumped to my mind as when you started that question, I thought you were going a different direction actually, and it reminded me. Most of these, we are specifically calling out that we are going to utilize alternate actions first. So if we find a mislabeled or an unregistered product in the marketplace, we don't jump straight to civil penalties. We send a letter of advisement first, give a 30-day window to get those products registered. As long as you register those products, take a look back at your records, make sure your registrations are all up to date. Like, that's the end of it. Our intent is to ensure that the industry is all complying with the regulations, not to be issuing civil penalties.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, so just kind of on that same string as we look at the compounding for the distributor side, I see the language there kind of clearly denotes it's not by product, but by type. So just curious your stance on, as a wholesaler, for example, again, hundreds, if not thousands of manufacturers in our portfolio we distribute on behalf of. So if we distribute an item that's not registered today for manufacturer A, 6 months later, manufacturer B product again enters different manufacturer, we distribute that. Are we looking at the same, progressive, or is that a secondary separate event because it's a different manufacturer, different product, although it's coming from the similar distributor?
Yeah, most likely neither. So the statutes and some of the rules that are not being edited right now pretty clearly place the responsibility for registration on the manufacturer.
Okay.
So it's not your responsibility to ensure that a product you happen to be one of multiple distributors. It's not your responsibility to ensure it's licensed.
That's
The
and
only
I guess
time-
just I would note that kind of conflicts with I think that's section A right there on the screen. Distributing commercial feed product that's not registered or offering for
Yes.
sale,
So-
right?
Yes. So there are places again. So these all. So
I guess
the
just concerned with
violation.
that language. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So this language is not what sets the requirement, right? So just because we say distributing there doesn't mean if you distribute any product that we can now issue you a civil penalty. You have to violate a separate rule or a statute that determines what is required to be registered, right? So there are times where a distributor may be held responsible for registering a feed. That's part of what we're hoping to better define, because it's
Okay.
not very well defined right now. And frankly, I don't know that there's any case where we could specifically go after a distributor right now. That it's actually, the rules are written right now to actually to limit our ability to do that, even if you are the guarantor. So part of this is looking at forward compatibility with those intended changes, right? If you as a distributor cause a product to be manufactured specifically for you, right? That's what we're hoping to address in the future, in that future revision of, at that point, you would, when your name is the one that's on the label as manufactured for, that is
Cross
when
into the
distributing.
guarantor space.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right now, we do not have any statutory language that defines a guarantor. So we have to kind of work our way around that and adopt some of that language. This is just being adopted for forward compatibility. Offering a product for sale is not doing it either. It's the selling, the distributing is language that's used in our statute that says a manufacturer that sells, offers for sale, or distributes a product into the state of Oregon must register that product, right? So that is language we're kind of copying from other places that is further defined to who it applies to.
Understood.
Right,
Yeah,
so-
and just noting the conflict
Yeah.
between the kind of
Yep.
the language and from the customer
Yeah.
facing side for the department definitely creates a point of confusion. So appreciate it.
Yeah. And we'll work hard to with our outreach when these rules changes are made to ensure that that's clear. One of the so where that comes in the statute and where we typically are looking at distribution for enforcement is from a manufacturer, right? A manufacturer may say, well, I'm not selling this product, right? I don't sell the product in Oregon. I manufacture it and then I distribute it to retailers, right? So that's really where that distribution is it's less about the acting as a company that is the middleman distributing it and more acting as the manufacturer that is. And that is clearly spelled out in the licensing requirement and in the statute that requires registration of products. Just neither of those are part of this rulemaking right now.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And there's that exposure
Yeah.
between, again,
Mhm.
as more manufacturers move to a wholesale model,
Mhm.
they're not going to know who the downstream customers or who the downstream states are. So,
Mhm.
We have that responsibility to very clear communication
Yes.
with our suppliers to
Mhm.
tell us where their products are registered, right? But in the event that they're not consistent with what our expectations are,
Yeah.
right, that could open the door where a product not registered into Oregon
Mhm.
by the manufacturer intentionally could
Mhm.
then be offered for sale or distributed by the wholesaler into
Yeah.
the state. And just, again, seems like there could be a little opportunity there. So again, thanks so much, Ryan. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
Yep.
Oh,
There is a huge opportunity there. So much
Yeah.
so that we wanted to address that as its own whole rule change process and do the
yes.
outreach to make sure that we update our rules to reflect the industry, not expecting the industry to cram themselves into the box that we have created by our rules.
I know, absolutely. Yeah, I'll concede to Rodney. It looks like he's got something as well. So
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Perry.
Dr. Perry?
I was just gonna say, I think that line is more pertaining, we all think of MWI as a distributor, but I would say that's more pertaining to somebody like me who's a retailer, but I also have the products that are manufactured for me, which are
Mhm.
registered. I think I'm up to like 9 of them now or something. And so anyhow, if I'm selling, offering for sale, or distributing those to my customer without a license, then I would be in violation. And I think that's the way I would read that. Not as, if MWI was selling the product, they would not be the manufacturer, because the only penalties are basically for manufacturers. Is that correct, Ryan?
For the most part, yes. And again, it is really important to note that this specific rule does not create any violations. This is simply creating categories that if you violate this other rule that says you have to be licensed as a distributor in order to take these actions, and you violate that, we now take that violation, which is violating a rule that says you were selling or distributing a product that wasn't registered. And now we take that violation and we compare it to all these categories and see, okay, that violation of this rule over here falls into 2CA, selling, offering for sale, or distributing. Therefore, it is a category 3 violation. This is your first offense, and it's a $250 civil penalty. Does that make a little more sense of what this is? We're just creating buckets that other violations fit into here. We're not specifying that these actions in a vacuum are a violation. Does that help any in clarifying that a
I
bit
think
too?
so. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, Dr. Ferry, you fall under all of those categories. You're having it manufactured for yourself, you're distributing it, you're selling it at retail. So yeah, you rightfully so are the guarantor of that product. But again, our rules really don't clearly reflect that either in how those licenses are delineated, and so we really do want to fix that. Really appreciate that the conversation on that and feedback on that.
Okay. Any of our public members that want, Corey, go ahead, and then we'll get to our public members.
I was just curious about products that are manufactured in Oregon but not sold in Oregon. So, you know, with other states that may have other labeling requirements but that are manufactured here but distributed outside of Oregon, how does this affect those products?
So the rules being proposed today doesn't change the impact to those products from what it was yesterday, if that makes sense. So the statutes that underlie this program and create the requirements for registration for all that apply to products that are manufactured in Oregon also. If there is a case, I mean, we are given some latitude there. So the products do still have to be registered in Oregon if they're manufactured here.
Right.
There is some inherent enforcement discretion that is given to the department for things like that, right? Where our rules may require a specific format for the label, but this product is being distributed specifically for sale in Minnesota, which requires X, Y, and Z to be different, right? That there is some discretion there that can be utilized to ensure that, right, we're not going to, as long as you've got the product registered and any product that's for sale in Oregon has the correct labeling for Oregon sale, we're not going to give you a civil penalty because we find a product on your, in your warehouse on a pallet that is clearly marked as, for sale in Michigan with, matching their label when it's, your product that we're seeing on shelves in Oregon is matching ours. That's right. Not the intent of any of this.
Yep. Okay.
We try really hard to utilize the national standard. We know that hasn't always been the case in Oregon, and we fell behind for a while. But if there are discrepancies, that's part of why we have people in the program rather than just an online system to register. So certainly reach out if there's issues there. Let us know about those, and we're happy to work with you through those kind of special cases.
Okay. Public members, if you want to raise your hand and I can call on you if you have any questions or comments. Okay, not seeing any there. Cost for compliance with changes in the rules. Any comments there? Doesn't really add much to what you already have to do. Okay. And one other piece that the Secretary of State requires us to contemplate is how it could impact racial equity in the state. I don't know, because these apply to everybody equally across the board, doesn't take into account racial equity. I don't think that there's any impacts to that one way or the other.
I did not.
Okay.
Did not.
So again, process, take these comments into account. We will be filing these as proposed with the Oregon Secretary of State, which starts the public comment process. Again, please go to oda.direct/rulemaking to see the information, sign up for email notifications for when those rules are open for public comment. We try to capture you in other email lists that we might have with you, but that's the guaranteed way. And don't think there's anything else. So other than sincere appreciation for everybody's time and thought process.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your engagement on this and your time today to help us work through these rules.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you.
holiday season.